Hey everyone, my name is Ben Scheisch.
And I am Oslo Heisch.
And Oslo is, as you can tell, probably a little bit sick, so he helped me start and set up this whole office YouTube studio for this video today, so I told him he could be in the beginning of this. But today we are looking at Voigtlander's first kind of foray into lenses specifically designed for the Fujifilm FX mount system with their 35mm Nokton f1.2. This is a lens that, for Fujifilm, I feel like has been way too long in the making. There hasn't been a company like Voigtlander that has a history and a reputation of making really fantastic lenses that specifically is made to like have character and be a little bit different from, you know, what is already kind of available on the market for the Fujifilm system within their native lines. So right off the bat, it is a 35mm 1.2 lens, so that equates to being more like a, you know, 50mm f like 1.8 or so. And while this lens isn't exactly out yet, I was loaned this lens by Camera Quest, and I believe at the time of filming this video, I believe it is available for order and in stock. So it is in stock and shipping from Camera Quest. So I'll leave a link in the description below if you're interested in picking this up. While they lent me this lens, I don't get to keep it, and no money has changed hands as of yet for anything of this channel and this stuff. I just find a lot of Voigtlander stuff very interesting. And when given the opportunity to review this lens, I said, absolutely, I would love to. So what I will base this off of is my own experience in using the lens for about the last week or two, as well as kind of addressing some of the comments that I've seen from other people that have reviewed the lens as well. So first off, the Voigtlander is the Voigtlander Nokton kind of series of lenses from them. One of the main things that I'm seeing from reviews right off the bat here is that people are kind of bummed on the sharpness of this lens, or lack thereof, I guess. But from what I've heard from Camera Quest and from others, is it was sort of an intentional thing on Voigtlander's part to not make a super clinical, boring lens, because I think that that is kind of like the knock on a lot of Fujifilm lenses, is that they're a little bit what people deem to be clinical. Now, one of the other things about this lens that could be good for you if you're interested in more of that character and stuff, which is where I think this lens really excels at, is that it flares a ton. And the flares are super interesting. And I actually put together, I just kind of tossed this on to video mode and went through kind of what the flares looked like, as well as kind of stopping down. So kind of as you stop down the lens, you'll get a lot of that kind of haze and flare and stuff like that diminishing. So if it's something you don't like, then, you know, obviously you can find ways to control it by either using your hand as a lens hood, which I do often, or, you know, using the included very tiny little lens hood. Aside from the character and things like that, obviously this is a manual focus lens. It's one of the reasons why this lens is so small. It's also really well built. I have zero issues with the build quality. This manual focus ring has the amount of dampening that I like. I think it's great. It weighs next to nothing. Even with this tiny body, it's not going to be front heavy enough that it's going to knock the camera down. And as you can sort of see with the size, it is very small and kind of fits that manual focus, you know, Leica vibe that I think a lot of kind of Fujifilm shooters are going for or kind of appreciate in those realms. So I don't know if I'll be able to hide behind this enough to like get it to focus on the lens and not me, but yeah. It's super small, really lightweight. I think it weighs like less than 200 grams. But what makes this lens so special, outside of its character and just the general rendering of the lens, is the fact that it's actually chipped. So it has electronics inside of the lens, even though it's manual focus. it communicates with the camera, so you get all of these extra manual focus settings that you wouldn't normally get with any other lens. Mainly something that the Leica cameras don't even do. It communicates what aperture you're using. So if you want to kind of know or have an idea of what's going on, it communicates all that information to the camera, which then gets put onto the kind of like final raw file. And another thing that is super, super cool about it, it brings up the manual focus kind of bar at the bottom, exactly where you're focusing. And as you stop down, if you've ever done this with a Fujifilm camera in manual focus mode, you can see exactly the range of kind of distance that your subject or whatever will be in focus on if you are in that range. So it's just super, super helpful. You can see all of that kind of stuff from like the hyperfocal distance. So great for street shooting and just generally kind of checking your focus, as this obviously is not an autofocus lens. All of those tools are really, really helpful. Another thing is the camera can sense as you are, moving and changing focus on it. It will zoom into 100% of whatever that area is on your camera. And that makes this super, super good too, especially if you're doing non-moving subjects like portraits or whatever. You can set your focus point to wherever you want and then start to adjust that focus. It will zoom in perfectly for you and give you that focus no problem. And what I've found is, since it does that automatically, it can be a little bit annoying if you are, photographing a moving subject or something. But what I've done is just kind of half press the shutter and then it pulls it out of that mode. And that's become a super, super good workaround for this lens. A couple other things that are pretty cool about this: since it communicates to the camera, it will automatically switch your camera from an autofocus mode to a manual focus mode, because obviously your autofocus isn't going to work. But on another lens that doesn't have that feature, if you're adapting some other manual focus glass, you're gonna have to switch out of those to get some of these manual focus tools, and most of them aren't gonna work. And although I don't have that feature in the XE4, for the cameras like the X-T4 and the XS10 and some of the other cameras from the Fuji lineup that have in-body image stabilization, this does communicate the focal length and stuff like that to those cameras, so it gives you that stabilization support as well. One of the things that I always recommend before you take out a new piece of gear on an actual shoot of any kind is to make sure that you're kind of putting the lenses and the equipment through their paces in any sort of way that might be similar to what you would be working with on a job. One of the things that I didn't notice necessarily is I took this up to Snoqualmie Pass, where I do a lot of shooting and stuff like that. And I took my sons on a bike ride with my mom, and we just went out, and I put this camera around my neck and then just would kind of like grab shots as we went. And one of the things that I do when I'm shooting landscapes is I'm often just tossing my camera at f5.6, toss it on infinity, figured this will all be fine. But when I imported the photos back into Lightroom, I saw that this lens actually goes beyond infinity, so Buzz Lightyear style. It just ended up being an issue for me, something that now I know to look out for. But as I was just riding a bike with my kids on the back and stuff like that, and just kind of like tossing it up to just get a general framing or shooting on the back like this, just my general assumption would have been that it would be in focus, and they weren't. So definitely missed out on every photo of these mountains and everything that would have been beautiful photos and look great from a very, very small little thumbnail style, but now you can definitely tell that they are not sharp. I mean, it was definitely a good thing that I was checking in on that and not using it for a job that needed that to be correct, I guess. All right, so one of the things I wanted to do just to give an idea of the general character and sharpness, although I don't have any of the native 35mm Fuji lenses, I do have the 7 Artisans 35 0.95. And I have a Zeiss 35mm Distagon for the Leica M mount system that I can use with an adapter. And so that will give us at least a little bit of a baseline of comparison, and we can jump in and kind of see these images side by side. Here is obviously the Voigtlander on this side, and then on this side is that 7 Artisans 0.95. So as we zoom in here to kind of check things out, you can see that they're actually pretty similar in sharpness, although the Voigtlander definitely has obviously that glow, kind of a little bit more of that happening. Specifically when you look into the detail here, this 7 Artisans lens definitely has a little bit more sharpness. But you know, I also feel like the exact focus might be further back ever so slightly on the Voigtlander one. If you look at the amount of texture here on the top than on the 7 Artisans, I feel like the 7 Artisans is slightly more front focused here, while the Voigtlander is slightly more back focused. You can get a general idea, but that's kind of how we're feeling here. So oddly, they're fairly similar in terms of sharpness, but definitely vastly different in terms of character. The 7 Artisans is actually really smooth and good in that regard, but the character of the Voigtlander is where you're really kind of getting that look. You know, you can see that the bokeh is way more pronounced and definitely gives you a bigger feel in all of this stuff. You know, if you want the background to melt away, I guess you use a 0.95 lens. And if you want the bokeh and the background to have more character and more depth and stuff, that's kind of where this lens would be really good for you. Surprisingly as well, obviously I moved the shutter speeds to compensate for each of the lenses, but the size of the bokeh actually isn't that much different in the 7 Artisans 0.95 than it is on the 1.2 of the Voigtlander. So, all right, and here we go. On the left, we have the Zeiss Distagon 35 1.4 with a Leica M adapter, and then again with the Voigtlander on this side. And you can see that these lenses actually share a lot more in terms of character and rendering, although the Zeiss is clearly the sharpness winner here and is just kind of meant to be more of a sharp lens. But overall, they look a lot more similar, and for the Voigtlander being, I think, $649 versus like $2,200, $2,300 for the Zeiss, I can feel where this would be a pretty good value and a pretty good play. So overall, this lens is definitely a little bit more expensive maybe than some other lenses that you could buy vintage or whatever. But at $649, I do feel like it's a good lens for the value and the money and everything like that. If you are into this type of lens and this type of experience, I think that this is definitely something that if I was a primarily Fujifilm photographer and maybe had an X Pro 3 and wanted that kind of more filmy vibe to my photography, it's definitely something that I would consider picking up. The experience of using it is great. All of the manual focus tools work really well with it. And while I prefer a lens that maybe is a little bit more modern in its rendering, I think that if you are a Fujifilm shooter that has a bunch of other Fuji glass, having a lens that has a little bit more character maybe allows you to get some more creative shots and, you know, kind of adds a little bit of dimension into your stuff. I'll put a link down below to check it out from CameraQuest. So thanks again to them for loaning me this lens to check out. I would be really, really excited to see if Voigtlander continues to make some of their other lenses into lenses for this system, because while this might not be my kind of favorite lens that they could toss onto this camera in this system, I do really love a lot of their products and things like that. So definitely looking forward to the next kind of iterations that they're coming out with. So if you are into Leica content or Fujifilm content, I do a ton of work around those particular brands. So if you're into either of those, subscribing would be a great idea. And I will see you all on the next one.